All right. News of the week. So this is actually really cool. I'm really a big fan of this. I'll let you go ahead and explain what you've done here.
Yeah, so this is what I've been tracking since the 2020 season when we were playing Modern Warfare all online. That's when I first got into the COD League. And to me, it matters a lot. And specifically when teams match up, how much are you winning by, I think matters more than most people give it credit for. So this graph that you see here just shows the average margin of victory in a game of Hardpoint from a bunch of different timelines. The red bar on the far left is last week. On average, teams won by 51 points in Hardpoint. About a 250 to 199 win would be the average game, which is much, much closer than any other timeline we've seen. And it's a consistent trend opening weekends from the last several years. Opening weekend, Cold War season, the gap was 75 points per team. Then in Vanguard, that got chopped off by 10 points. Then a year later in MW2, another 5 points deducted. And then this year, 8 points off of that. Just a consistent trend that hard points are getting closer and closer, at least in opening weekends. I also included full season data to see how it shifts as the year goes on. So last year, really not much of a change at all. Most games ended around a 60-point difference. In Vanguard and in Cold War, the games got tighter as the year went on. And there's reasons for that. Obviously, map pools can fluctuate between games. Teams just understand the meta a little more as the game goes on. In theory, the skill gap between the teams should shrink as time goes on. Map vetoes get a little more obvious and understandable, so teams can prepare for the maps they expect to play. I'm interested to see how this year compares to last year. I think it'll actually stay the same like it did last year. I think it's just hard for me to imagine it getting much closer than 51 points on average, but it very well could if, again, we switch up the maps or something changes in the meta that can drastically affect things. But yeah, just an interesting nugget that, at least for me, watching the games last weekend, it felt like we had a lot of close maps, and I think this data justifies that completely.
Yeah, 100%. And this data is fascinating. I have a couple questions first to ask. So, when you say opening weekend, do you just mean the opening weekend, or do you mean the first weekends up until the major?
Yeah, good question. And there are like preseason tournament stuff. So opening weekend for MW2, for Vanguard, and for Cold War is just the first weekend of regular online qualifiers. So in Cold War, I believe there was a weekend where they were like showcase matches. I think that every team played once and that was it. I did not include those for Cold War. In Vanguard, we had the Kickoff Classic that I think Surge beat Toronto on, or Toronto beat Surge. Yeah, Toronto beat Surge. I did not include that. So again, it's just the first weekend of regular qualifiers.
Right.
Yep, and then last year, I think the first games were regular online qualifiers. So nothing to tweak there. But yeah, no, good question.
Because I think last year they did 2 weeks of online qualifiers and then went right to the major, which was the Pro-Am major, which doesn't exist this year. Fascinating looking at this. It's really cool. So yeah, you make the good point that last year there was no real change from opening weekend to season-long stats. But the 2 years before, there's about roughly a 7-ish point gap between first week and longer season, long term in the season, it gets closer. They become more competitive. Now, the interesting thing that struck me this last week was just how similar this game is to last year. It looks the same. It feels in many ways. I know it's not the same. There is different movement and the guns are different and there's increased health, but it just feels a lot the same. Like watching it again, like watching it with now there's reasons for that. They haven't changed the scoreboard in 4 years now. There's reasons why it looks the same, but I think and again, when you look at it outside of Vanguard full season, this is one of the lowest, most competitive map sets we've had. And we made this point last week when talking about betting hard point spreads. We talk about dead points like we do in football. And we said, okay, 50 is you could, like, in past years, going back to Cold War, even last year, we didn't mind betting a minus 25, minus 35, etc. But now I think you have to really think about that. And I think one of the reasons why last week was so close, especially, is that a lot of these maps have pretty strong money hills. And some of these are like one money hill after another money hill. So what would happen is Team 1 gets money hill. Team 2 tries a break. Doesn't work. They say, cool, whatever. Screw that. We're going to go take the other money hill. Then the other team basically they hold that point. They try to break the new money hill. They fail. They say, screw it, we're going to go to the next hill. And I think because of that, you basically, both teams just soak up points, and it basically makes the end a lot more competitive. And this is the thing, right? To make the football comparison, right? If the spread in a game is, say, 3.5 points, right? And basically the team that's favored gets the ball with 2 minutes left in the game. Again, classic situation, your 2-minute drill. They get the ball with 2 minutes left in the game. They're not good. They're going down to kick a field goal. They have timeouts. They want to basically wait until there's 3 seconds left in the game, take a timeout somewhere around your opponent's 30-yard line, kick a game-winning field goal, game ends, that's it, done, right? They're not going down there to get a touchdown. They don't need to, right? Because if they score a touchdown, they can't control exactly when they cross the plane of the goal line. So they can't, like, when you kick a field goal, you can ensure that field goal is the last play of the game. If you score a touchdown, you can't ensure that the touchdown is the last play of the game. You're going to give the other team a chance to have the ball. Now, it's unlikely they'd score, but they could still theoretically score. So the correct thing to do is kick the field goal as time ends. This is similar in this case. So, for example, it's not exactly the same, but a similar instance is in hardpoint. Say you're at 225, and your opponents are at 170. They get a money hill. Okay, you could break the money hill, soak up 25 points, end the game. But you don't care because the next hill's a money hill. So you say, fine, take 60 seconds. I don't care. You can't win the game. You're going to get to 225. I don't care. Because then we get the money hill. We lock it down for 25 seconds. We win. And this is why Vanguard was closer to some extent. And this is why Modern Warfare 2 was where it was. And Cold War as well. Because when you have the ability to just lock down a money hill, you don't care. You'll let the other team get free points because the correct decision is always to lock down the next money hill. And I think that's why I don't think it's going to become less. I don't think it's become less competitive. I think they're going to be basically about the same, maybe even more competitive, as teams just say, screw it, take 60 points, I don't care. I think that's what we're looking at for this year.
Yeah, totally agree. I think a lot of teams, especially on a map where there are multiple money hills and multiple money hills in sequence, I think, a lot of teams are going to do the math and say, okay, here's a money hill. We have 200 points. They maybe are at 220 and climbing, but that hill is going to get chopped off pretty soon in a new money hill. We don't care if they get to 230, 235. If we just rotate and get the money hill, we can hold down 50 seconds, and then there's your 15-point win, there's your 20-point win. So it gets interesting. I think because there are so many money hills, it makes hardpoint a little worse to watch overall, just because there's a lot of dead time where it's, okay, if a team is going to decide to rotate early, with, say, 30 seconds left on the clock, 35 seconds left on the clock, that just means the teams are separated on the map pretty well. You're still trying to get rotation kills. Maybe you try to attack the hill with limited resources, see if you can get a 1v2 or just rip them off of scrap time. Teams are going to have this delicate balance of, okay, how much pressure do we put on the hill that's live, and how many resources do we commit to just turtling up and getting ready for the next hill, because that matters a lot. Now, we've heard spawns are going to change in hardpoint drastically into the new year. We'll see about that. Obviously, if there are new maps in the rotation eventually that have less money hills, this could mean not a lot come a month or two from now. But overall, I think right now, at least with how the maps play out, we're going to get a lot of close hard points. That being said, a lot of money hills on one map could lead to really big blowouts. And we saw that a handful of times when there were mismatches with two teams. We saw, I think Toronto beat LG by like 140 on sub base, which is a really small map, and I think will be close all year. Those will still happen because if you can somehow chain those money hills together, well, now you have a 100-point lead in the blink of an eye, and you just have to play for trades the rest of the way out, and ideally you'll hold that 100-point lead, if not make it grow. It's fascinating because it's all like a math problem that teams have to figure out, but yeah, interested to see if that gap between teams expands or even shrinks a little more than we saw this past weekend.
Yeah, I'm excited to see that as well. I think what we might do is we might do maybe after either after the major or right before the major, we'll maybe look at all online qualifiers before each major and then make that comparison and see if that holds too. That'd be a neat comparison to do a couple weeks from now. Search and destroy margin of victory. So again, close. Look, you're looking at last year, you're looking at 3, 2.8. It's basically always roughly average margin of victory is about 3, so your classic 6-3 win. 2.1. And again, when you're talking about betting and you see the plus 1.5s, those are pretty valuable. Or specifically, if the other thing too is if you think there's a real mismatch, if you think one team is much, much better, it means that you're probably going to get a better price on a minus 1.5. A minus 1.5 is going to be like plus 120, plus 130, right? And that's a really nice angle to have as well. If you see, okay, this team has really figured out search and destroy, you're not really afraid to bet that. But if they haven't, this is when, this is where if you're defaulting something, you're just going to be like over 9.5, over plus 1.5 for search.
Yeah, I think now this is actually like a more drastic difference than in the hard point. Like the difference between this year and last year, you said it perfectly. Like it's about 2.8 to 3 rounds difference on average for the last 3 years completely. And search and destroy, for the most part, plays pretty similarly every year. Now, why this year are the 6-3s now 6-4s, or 6-4s or 6-5s now? I just think it's like a small sample size. We only played, I don't even know, probably 15 search and destroys, 16 search and destroys this weekend. I think it will come up to that 2.8 level as time goes on, but it might not. It might stay a little lower if, for some reason, the search and destroy map set, if a lot of maps are very defensive favored or very offensive favored, that could lead to tighter games. One that just jumps out from the Cold War season was Checkmate Search and Destroy. Very defensive favored, and it was very rare that you had a game not go to a round 11 because a ton of games would just be defense wins, just constantly back and forth. You get to a round 11, hopefully your team has defense. So we saw a lot of round 11s on that map. Now, there are some search maps in this game that feel pretty defensive favored, but I didn't really see anything all weekend that seemed to suggest that we're going to have a map like Checkmate or something of that liking. So I think this number will just naturally go up, but just interesting to see that, at least for the most part, teams are pretty close in search and destroy right now. And will that change with roster moves and map changes? Yes, definitely. But yeah, it just jumped off the page. Again, I think this matters a little less than hardpoint, but still, overall, it's just an interesting nugget to see that teams were this competitive in a mode that is pretty skill-based. So yeah, and then we can move on to control as well. Control, not much change. Again, it is a little tighter than last year, but there's some wild swings. Like in Vanguard and in Cold War, the control margin of victory actually went up as the year went on, as teams tried to figure that out. Again, map sets changed. Last year was mostly the same. Control, we'll see how it plays out from here on out. Didn't move the needle as much as Hardpoint or Search did, but it's still interesting to see.
I feel like a little bit of splitting hairs there between a 1.8, 1.9, and 2, right? I think it just means that they've started designing Control better, where it's, hey, you can win an offensive round. Versus, like, literally back in original Vanguard and original Cold War, like, you couldn't, like, only the best teams could win an offensive round. That was like, going back to Cold War, that was like, Ultra could win an offensive rounds once they had insight, and FaZe could. And that was it. I think literally those are the only people you could those are the only teams you could reliably consider to win an offensive round. Anybody else was like, "Oh wow, they won an offensive round. Good for them. Congratulations." Literally, those are the anybody else was like, "You're not. This is expected to go to round 5." And same as Vanguard. But like this year, I think last year especially, either something with the new mechanics or just game design, or they figured out better places to put these. These are like actually functional control maps where you can win an offense. It's not impossible to win offensively. Plus, also, it's the new now. The other ones, I think they implemented whoever had defense round 5 as tick counter later in those seasons. I think they implemented a late Vanguard season, if I remember correctly. And then they implemented it. I think that was the full implementation for Modern Warfare 2, and then obviously full for this weekend as well. So that has an impact. It means you're going to be playing a bit more aggressively. Sometimes you just actually win, right? I think in some cases before it was like, okay, we're on offense. We got our 4 ticks. That's it, guys. Pack it up. We're done. We don't want to We don't want to waste more lives, right? But now it's okay. Let's actually just go for the win now because we can. And I think there's a lot of games before where someone could have won, but they didn't want to throw lives away, so they just said, "Yeah, we got we got the extra tick. We're good now. Let's just we have a live lead. We don't need to do anything now."
For sure. Yeah, totally agree about all that. Yeah, so I think this number will stay pretty much where it is. The maps feel pretty well balanced. So, yeah, we'll see moving forward.